Today, we're ranking the most iconic submarines of World War II, from the death traps that barely survived a patrol to the silent killers that terrorized entire oceans and sank fleets without warning. 10. The Italian Adua class. Worst. Italy entered the war with one of the largest submarine fleets in the world, over 100 boats. Sounds impressive, right? It wasn't. The Adua-class submarines, and there were 17 of them, were a masterclass in how not to build a submarine. Designed in the late 1930s, they were technically medium-range boats. But medium range in the Mediterranean meant you needed to be fast, quiet, and maneuverable. The Adua was none of these things. She dove slowly, dangerously slowly. In combat, a submarine that takes 60 seconds to dive when it should take 30 is not a submarine. It's a target. British destroyers figured this out quickly. Depth charges did the rest. The internal layout was cramped even by submarine standards. Crew morale was abysmal. Ventilation was so poor that in the heat of the Mediterranean summer, the internal temperature could hit 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 Fahrenheit, inside a metal tube, underwater, during a depth charge attack. Several Adua boats were lost to mechanical failure before they ever encountered the enemy. That tells you everything. Italy's submarine campaign in the Mediterranean was, charitably speaking, a disappointment. The Adua class was the loudest symbol of why. 9. The Soviet Schuka Pike class. The Soviet Union built submarines the way the Soviet Union built everything in the 1930s, fast, in bulk, and with a certain disregard for the men who had to operate them. The Schuka, or Pike class, was the backbone of the Soviet submarine fleet, and on paper, she looked respectable. Decent range, reasonable armament, but the Soviets had a problem that no amount of steel could fix: training. Soviet submariners were catastrophically undertrained. The doctrine was rigid, the officers were terrified of initiative, and the political officers on board, yes, political officers on submarines, created a culture where captains second-guessed every decision for fear of being reported. The result? Of the Schukas that went on war patrols in the Baltic and Black Sea, the loss rate was staggering. Some were sunk by mines, some by enemy ships, others simply vanished. No distress signal, no wreckage ever found. The boat itself wasn't catastrophically flawed, but a submarine is only as good as the human system around it, and the Soviet human system in 1941 and 1942 was broken. 8. The British S-class, early variants. Now don't get upset, the British built some extraordinary submarines. But the early S-class boats from the late 1930s earned their spot near the bottom of this list the hard way: small, cramped, designed for North Sea operations where range wasn't critical. Then the war started, and suddenly the Royal Navy needed these boats everywhere: Norway, the Mediterranean, the Far East. The S-class struggled everywhere it wasn't designed to go. The torpedo reload system was awkward. The pressure hull had thickness issues in the early variants that made deep diving genuinely dangerous. And the habitability, the ability for men to live in the boat on long patrols, was, by the accounts of veterans, absolutely miserable. One commander called it living inside a wet filing cabinet. To the Royal Navy's credit, they improved the S-class dramatically as the war went on. The later variants are a completely different story. But those early boats? They got men killed through design, not just enemy action. 7. The Japanese I-400 class. Here's where things get interesting and complicated. The I-400 was, in every technical sense, extraordinary, the largest submarines ever built during World War II, longer than a football field, capable of traveling 2/3 of the way around the world without refueling. Each one carried 3 aircraft in a watertight hangar on its deck. Let that sink in: submarines that launched airplanes. The Japanese designed them to strike the Panama Canal, cut the artery between the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. It was genuinely visionary. So why is it ranked 7? Because it never did anything. 3 were completed. The war ended before they could execute their mission. The concept was so far ahead of its time that the U.S. Navy delayed Japan's surrender announcement just to capture and study them in secret. Visionary design, 0 operational impact. In a war where results are everything, that matters. The I-400 is a museum piece that never became a weapon. Incredible, but ineffective. 6. The German Type II, the dugout canoe. That should tell you something. The Type II was Germany's smallest operational submarine, barely 40 meters long, crew of 25, limited range, only 3 torpedo tubes. But here's the thing about the Type II. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than what it was:
A coastal boat, a training vessel, a way to get crews combat-ready in the relatively safer waters of the Baltic. And at that job, it was excellent. The Type II trained the core of Germany's legendary U-boat force. Aces like Günther Prien and others cut their teeth on these little boats. Think of it as the boot camp from which the most lethal submarine campaign in history graduated. It wasn't a great weapon, but it built great submariners. That counts for something.
5. The American Narwhal class. Big, slow, loud. The USS Narwhal and her sister Nautilus were relics of 1920s submarine thinking that found themselves in a 1940s war. They were originally designed as long-range fleet submarines, the kind that would accompany surface battle groups. That concept was already obsolete by the time war broke out. Fast attack submarines had rendered the fleet submarine doctrine dead. But the Narwhal found a second life, a surprising one. Because she was so large, she could carry extraordinary amounts of cargo. The Navy repurposed her as a special operations transport, delivering supplies, gold, ammunition, and Filipino guerrilla fighters to occupied islands in the Pacific. She made 10 of these clandestine resupply runs. Dangerous work, slow work, but essential work that no other asset could do. The Narwhal is a story about adaptation. Not every weapon performs as designed. The best military organizations find new uses for what they have.
4. The British T-Class. Now we're into genuinely excellent territory. The T-Class was Britain's answer to its own early war failures. Longer range, better diving characteristics, and improved torpedo configuration that gave it 11 tubes, more than almost any other Allied submarine. The T-Class went everywhere. Mediterranean, Arctic, Pacific. It hunted in Norwegian fjords and stalked Japanese shipping lanes with equal effectiveness. What made it special wasn't any single feature. It was balance. A submarine that can do everything adequately is often more valuable than one that does one thing brilliantly. T-class crews trusted their boat, and in submarine warfare, trust between men and machine is the difference between a patrol and a funeral. HMS Torbay, HMS Turbulent, HMS Tally-Ho. These weren't just hull numbers. They were boats with reputations, with personalities, with histories that their crews carried home and told their grandchildren. That's what a good submarine gives you. Not just survival, legacy.
3. The German Type VIIC. No ranking of WW2 submarines is complete without it. The Type VIIC. The weapon that nearly won the Battle of the Atlantic. The most produced submarine class in history, over 700 built. The boat that, in 1942, was sinking Allied ships faster than they could be constructed. At its peak, the Type VIIC Wolfpack doctrine was strangling Britain. Literally, island nation, no imports. Churchill later wrote that the U-boat threat was the one thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. The VIIC was not the most comfortable boat, far from it. Crews lived in conditions that would horrify modern sailors. No showers for weeks, food rotting in the humidity, mold on the bread, diesel in the air, and the constant knowledge that the Allies were getting better at finding you. But the boat performed. Reliable diesel-electric propulsion, excellent torpedo system, responsive controls. A good captain in a Type VC was genuinely dangerous to Allied shipping in a way that disrupted strategic planning at the highest level. Why not number 1? Because by 1943, Allied anti-submarine warfare had cracked the code. Radar, ASDIC improvements, code breaking. The Type VC became a death sentence rather than a weapon. Over 75% of all Type VC crew members who served in the war were killed. The most fearsome submarine of the early war? A coffin by the end of it.
2. The American Gato/Balao class. The Pacific is a different ocean. Vast, deep, unforgiving in ways the Atlantic isn't. To fight there, you needed a different submarine. The Gato and her improved sister, the Balao class, were purpose-built for exactly that. Long range, capable of 11,000 miles. Fast on the surface, deep diving, comfortable enough, by submarine standards, for extended patrols of 60 or 70 days. And the results? Devastating. American submarines in the Pacific represented roughly 2% of U.S. Navy personnel and sank 55% of all Japanese shipping lost during the war. Think about that number. A tiny fraction of the force delivering more than half the strategic damage. Japan's economy ran on shipping. Iron ore from Manchuria, oil from the Dutch East Indies, food, equipment, troops. The Gato and Balao class severed those arteries one ship at a time, and Japan bled out. The Mark 14 torpedo scandal, where early war torpedoes ran deep and failed to explode, is a black mark on the program. But once that was fixed in 1943, American submarines went to work with brutal efficiency. These were the boats that made island hopping possible, the boats that starved the Japanese war machine, the unsung weapons of the Pacific War.
1. The German Type XXI, the Electro boat. And here is the boat that haunted Allied naval intelligence for the rest of the 20th century. The Type 21 never won the war for Germany. It came too late. Only 2 went on operational patrols before Germany surrendered in May 1945. Neither sank an Allied ship, but every post-war submarine, Soviet, American, British, French, was built in its shadow. Here's what made the Type 21 revolutionary. It was the first submarine designed not to surface. Every previous submarine was really a surface ship that could dive. It needed to come up to charge batteries, to run at speed, to attack. The Type 21 changed the equation entirely. A massive battery capacity, 3 times that of the Type VIIC, allowed it to remain submerged for days. A revolutionary snorkel system let it charge while remaining hidden just below the surface. Its underwater speed of 17 knots was faster than most Allied escort ships could pursue. It could outrun a destroyer while submerged. The sonar was the most advanced of any submarine in the war. The torpedo system could fire salvos of 6 in under 20 seconds with automatic reloading. The crew quarters were, by 1945 submarine standards, almost civilized. Admiral Karl Donitz called it the weapon that could have changed everything. Allied commanders, who captured several intact at war's end, agreed and immediately rushed them back to their own shipyards for study. The Soviet November class, the early American attack submarines, the British post-war fleet, all of them carried the Type 21's DNA. It didn't win a battle, but it rewrote the blueprint for every submarine that came after. That's not just the best submarine of World War II. That's arguably the most influential warship design of the entire 20th century.
If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like this one too. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Our channel is small, so we are replying every comment below. Comment any suggestion for future videos. Thanks for watching.